You know how history often spotlights the grand political movements, the big names? Well, today we're diving into something a bit different, someone really extraordinary. Helen Crawford. Her contributions, immense contributions to social change in Scotland and, well, way beyond, were often overlooked. But they genuinely shaped her era. Get ready for some, I think, truly surprising insights.
It's absolutely right. And our mission here in this deep dive is really to explore early 20th century Scottish women's activism. And specifically through the remarkable lens of Helen Crawford and, her contemporaries, we really want to show you the deep interconnectedness of movements that might seem separate, from suffrage, housing rights, anti-war efforts, right through to the birth of international communism. It's a journey that, frankly, challenges those traditional historical narratives that have sidelined these powerful women for far too long.
And we've got some fantastic sources lined up for this, rich biographical bits, really insightful academic analyses on women in the Scottish labor movement.
Yeah, and those detailed accounts from historical newspapers, too.
Exactly. They all kind of combine to create this vibrant mosaic, this picture of a really turbulent but transformative period.
So why does Helen Crawford's story matter to you today? You're looking for knowledge, right? Quick but thorough. Her life offers these potent reminders that social progress often starts small, not in grand halls, but in these defiant acts, defying a husband facing down landlords, even finding a suffragette figure in the Bible, of all places. You'll hear how her activism, which was so multifaceted, connected struggles that seemed quite disparate. It's a really insightful look into the mechanics of change, maybe revolution even, and how individuals can drive that from the margins.
Okay, so let's begin with Helen Crawford herself. Born 1877, died 1954. Her early life in Glasgow's Docklands sounds like it was absolutely pivotal. How did that environment shape her early awareness, ignite her activism?
Oh, it wasn't just a backdrop, It was the spark. Crawford herself talked about it. She recounted her appalled reaction to, and I'm quoting here, Dockland life and human misery indescribable.
Yeah.
Ugly, inhuman, and cruel.
Wow, strong words.
Yeah. And this wasn't just like an observation. It was a profound awakening. It sparked a, quote, passionate desire to change those conditions. And that desire truly became the driving force of her entire life.
That early exposure clearly sparked something deep. But it seems her rebellion wasn't just, external. It started at home. She even found her first suffragette in the Bible, Queen Vashti. What do these sort of personal acts of rebellion tell us about her, how she developed that powerful voice?
Well, these seemingly small acts, they were foundational. They really shaped her into this gifted public speaker. She was known for this incredible ability to turn angry mobs into sympathizers. It was this great story from Perth, 1914. She was initially pelted with rotten fruit.
No way.
Yeah. But by the end of the week, she'd won the crowd over, had them singing along, apparently. And, literary influences played a part, too. Dickens, Victor Hugo, plays by Ibsen. They shaped her socialist thinking, her awareness of systemic exploitation.
That skill, that oratorical power, must have been absolutely critical when we look at, well, one of the most significant moments in Scottish social history, the Glasgow rent strikes of 1915. What was the housing situation like then? What led to such an explosive movement?
Well, the First World War just dramatically worsened an already dire situation. Late 1914, you get this influx of thousands of workers into munitions districts. Glasgow's housing was already congested, and this just made it impossible. And the landlords, far from being patriotic, they engaged in what was clearly wartime profiteering.
Just cashing in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Blatantly overcharging for overcrowded flats, tiny rooms. It really fueled public disgust, you can imagine.
Sound like a powder keg waiting to blow. And into this steps someone like Mary Barber, a key organizer in the South Govan Women's Housing Association, formed June 1915. This sounds like real grassroots activism born among ordinary housewives.
Absolutely. And the tactics these women used were incredibly effective and quite inventive. They simply refused the inflated rent demands. They met in kitchens and closes, like early networking, right?
Really?
Sharing news about upcoming evictions. Then, using handbells and rattles, they'd alert other women.
Like an alarm system.
Precisely. Who would then come onto the streets to drive off the sheriff's officers. It was this community, united in defiance. Really powerful.
And it wasn't just the women, right? The shipyard and factory workers threatened strikes.
Yes, massive solidarity. The argument was incredibly powerful. Many of these women tenants had husbands, sons, fighting and dying at the front. So the landlord's actions just seemed utterly unpatriotic. It struck a real nerve.
It really shows that power of collective action.
Oh, definitely. And the climax, the dramatic climax, arrived on November 17th, 1915. Thousands of women. They were nicknamed Mrs. Barber's Army by William Gallacher, the communist leader. They were accompanied by shipyard and engineering workers, and they all converged on the sheriff's courts.
A massive show of force.
It couldn't be ignored.
And just to give you a sense of the real-world impact, there's an example of a Mr. Reed. His pre-war rent was 118 blacks. It went up by 3 shillings and 2 pence. Now that sounds like maybe not a huge amount today, about 8%.
Right, but context is key.
Yeah, for working women earning maybe 19 times a week, or even a skilled tram driver making $516 a month. That kind of rise was completely unsustainable. It could push families over the edge.
Exactly. It was a genuine crisis. So Sheriff Lee, he acted as an astute diplomat, as the sources say. He urged the landlord's agent to drop the actions on patriotic grounds, at least until an official committee could report.
And did they?
They did. The case was dropped,
Yeah.
and there was loud cheering inside and outside the court. This directly led to the resulting Rent Restrictions Act, a UK-wide act.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it benefited tenants nationwide, and it made Mary Barber this popular legend in Gavan. It really shows how local activism can spark foundational national change.
Amazing story. But Crawford's activism, as you said, wasn't just about housing. Her roots were deep in the suffrage movement, too. What was her role there, before the rent strikes?
Right before the war really kicked off, Helen Crawfurd was a member of the Militant Women's Social and Political Union, the WSPU, in Glasgow. She was active. She participated in that big 1912 London window-smashing raid. Interestingly, she herself noted receiving privileged treatment from the police because of her middle-class appearance.
So even within these radical movements, class dynamics were still very much there.
Absolutely a stark reminder.
But the suffrage movement wasn't simple, especially in Scotland. There was that really controversial incident, the attempted bombing of Robert Burns's birthplace, July 1914, by Francis Parker and Ethel Moorhead, who weren't Scottish, right? English and Irish.
That's correct. And the public fury was immense. This act, it was widely seen as an attack against the Scottish nation. There was widespread dismay and utter contempt. Crawford herself was appalled. She actually feared being torn limb from limb for having to defend these actions to crowds. It really fractured public opinion.
So how did she respond? Sounds like a tricky position.
Very nuanced, actually. On one hand, she worked hard to distance Scottish suffragettes from the perpetrators' apparent ignorance of Burns' cultural importance.
Okay.
But on the other hand, she also argued that Burns himself would have gladly sacrificed his birthplace for women's freedom. A clever rhetorical move, trying to bridge that gap.
And what happened to Frances Parker? The consequences sound brutal.
They were. She endured forcible feeding at birth prison, and this included what was called rectum feeding. Scholars like June Purvis describe this today as essentially a form of rape.
God, that's horrific.
It is, and it shows that Parker's punishment for this crime against the nation, as it was seen, could not be alleviated by her class privilege. She was punished specifically as a woman for daring to challenge the state in that way.
And there were internal tensions within the WSPU, too, weren't there? The dismissal of Janie Allen.
Yes, Janie Allen, a prominent Glasgow suffragette, she was dismissed by Emmeline and Christabel Pankhurst because Allen had tried to bargain with the enemy, meaning the government, to get them to halt forcible feeding.
So trying to negotiate was seen as weakness.
By the Pankhursts, yes. This caused considerable indignation among the Glasgow WSPU members. They sent a delegation, including Crawford, down to London to confront the Pankhursts. But the Pankhursts, invoking what some saw as English superiority, basically said, if Scottish women are prepared to bargain, then English women are not. Yeah. And ultimately, they convinced the delegation to back down for the greater cause.
Yeah.
But it really reveals those hierarchical, sometimes nationalistic strains within the movement itself. And it's worth noting, too, the tactic of hunger striking for political prisoner status. That wasn't new. The Russian method was known among British suffragettes. So there are these transnational influences even in their tactics.
Okay, shifting focus again. How did Crawford's commitment evolve towards anti-war efforts during the First World War? She was central to the Women's Peace Crusade, the WPC, formed in June 1916.
Right, the WPC, co-founded with Agnes Dolan and Mary Barber, names we keep hearing, showing that overlap emerged directly from the war's devastation. Now, it's crucial to understand their opposition wasn't pure pacifism as we might think of it today. It was rooted in socialist anti-imperialism.
Okay, what does that mean practically?
It meant they specifically targeted wars driven by colonial expansion and imperial profiteers was the term, the wasteful war. They weren't necessarily against all conflict in all circumstances, and they used provocative propaganda to get their message across.
What kind of messaging were they using to rally support? How did they connect with people?
They employed very powerful maternal rhetoric, appealing to that shared suffering of mothers in Europe, suffering from the war, while squarely blaming scheming diplomats and the system. The emblem of the WPC was, quite tellingly, an innocent child, symbolizing the future being destroyed by the conflict.
Very evocative. It sounds like they were trying to build a very broad coalition. Did they have international links too?
Absolutely. And they consciously linked socialism and religion to broaden that base. Crawford in particular was apparently very skilled at using biblical stories, but injecting her own interpretations, using them as propaganda among women.
Interesting tactic.
Yeah, reaching religious communities that might otherwise have been closed off. And yes, strong transnational connections. These came directly from Crawford and Dolan's involvement in the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, WILPF-KIF, that was established at The Hague in 1915. A groundbreaking moment, really. Women from opposing sides of the war uniting against it.
And Crawford was meant to be there?
She was. She'd actually been granted a passport to attend, but then the shipping lanes were closed, preventing her from traveling. A real blow.
So despite these obstacles, how far did the WPC's influence actually spread?
Well, despite everything, the WPC spread nationwide by 1917, became a genuine mass movement. They were calling for an immediate negotiated end to war, which was radical then. They faced, scathing attacks from the mainstream press, government-backed patriotic mobs trying to break up their meeting.
It must have taken incredible courage.
Absolutely. But they persisted. And then, the Russian Revolution in 1917, that brought the first real gleam of hope to their cause. It suggested a real alternative to the old world order was possible.
Okay, so after the war, her commitment pivots again, even further towards communist internationalism. And this takes her on that really daring journey to Russia itself. What was motivating her to make that perilous trip to Moscow in 1920?
Her daring spirit really shines through here, doesn't it? She embarks on this journey, defies Norwegian police, gets smuggled into the country by rowing.
That's just incredible.
But apparently she relished the adventure, her main motivation, to see for herself the position of women in the new scheme of things in Soviet Russia. It speaks volumes about her dedication, her curiosity, wanting to witness that revolution firsthand.
And she didn't just observe, she met Lenin and Krupskaya.
Yes, Vladimir Lenin himself and Nadezhda Krupskaya, Lenin's wife, who was chair of the Education Committee. They specifically discussed the role of women in communism.
What was her impression of them, these legendary figures?
She was apparently awestricken by Lenin's humble and virtuous nature, found it a refreshing change from the high politics she was used to. And upon her return, she became a co-founding member of the Communist Party of Great Britain, the CPGB, in 1920. She quickly became its first women's organizer and editor of the women's page in the communist newspaper, which later became the Sunday Worker.
And the page had a great title.
Yeah, a page for women, which men can read with advantage. Brilliant. She envisioned, quote, pictures of the romance and beauty of life under the common ownership of the workers. A really comprehensive vision.
Beyond the political organizing, her internationalism extended to practical aid, didn't it? The Workers' International Relief, WIR, founded in 1921 for the Russian famine.
Yes, WIR Crawford became secretary of the British section, and she traveled extensively throughout the 1920s, aiding impoverished areas of Europe. This included Germany, where children in Berlin suffered terrible malnutrition due to that post-Versailles hyperinflation, and also Ireland, particularly Donegal, which was devastated by floods. Her practical work was absolutely tireless, driven by this deep sense of international solidarity.
Yet even humanitarian work faced hurdles back then, right? Anti-communist sentiment.
Oh, definitely. WIR faced huge challenges. Anti-communist groups labeled it a front organization, which really hindered its crucial relief efforts.
But did it still have an impact?
Yes, because WIR's work wasn't just charity. It actively promoted working-class solidarity. During the British General Strike of 1926, for example, WIR worked tirelessly to provide aid to mining communities, despite constant attacks from the British press. This really strengthened international working-class solidarity. Crawford herself saw WIR as genuinely dangerous to international capitalism because it had that power to unite workers across borders.
Okay, let's fast forward into the 1930s. By 1933, Crawford, then 56. She's feeling the strain of her arduous life, all the traveling, no abiding city, as she put it. He returns to Scotland, settles in Dunoon near Glasgow, but her activism doesn't stop. She becomes honorary secretary of an anti-fascist committee. What was the threat of fascism like in Britain then?
Well, this was a really critical time. The British Union of Fascists, the BUF, under Oswald Mosley, was definitely on the rise. And it wasn't just a London thing. It had a presence in Scotland, too, in places like Dumfries, Motherwell. It posed a real and growing threat, and that early resistance was crucial.
And the CPGB, the Communist Party that Crawford helped shape, played a key role in resisting this, didn't they? Through community organizing.
Yes, very much so. Setting up anti-fascist committees, local actions. They even managed to get a CPGB representative elected to the Dumfries Town Council in 1935, which shows real grassroots political effectiveness against fascism.
But it wasn't just local committees, was it? The CPGB took a more militant approach sometimes.
They did, especially at that infamous 1934 Olympia rally in London. Counter-protesters, many organized by the CPGB, directly confronted Mosley's black shirts. It led to significant violence, reports of knuckle dusters and razors.
Nasty stuff.
Yeah. But that event was pivotal. It really exposed the BUF for what they were, violent and dangerous. It damaged their public image significantly. And crucially, the CPGB's transnational connections meant they had an early awareness of what fascism was doing in Europe, in Germany, and Italy. They could act with that foresight.
And Helen Crawford herself. Her political life continued even later.
It did. She became the first woman councillor on Dunoon Council in 1946, continuing to serve her community.
So looking back at this remarkable, multifaceted life, what does it tell us about that broader historical context, about the fight for social justice, especially for women?
Well, her contributions, and those of women like her, have often been omitted or undervalued. There's that provocative academic article titled, Scottish Labour History, No Woman's Land.
A telling question.
It really is.
Yeah.
Helen Crawford exemplified what we now call socialist feminism. She saw class oppression and gender oppression not as separate battles, but as intrinsically linked. They had to be fought together. Her life fundamentally challenges that historical argument that women's activism in this period was just class rather than gender-focused. For her, they were absolutely inseparable, and she fought tirelessly on all fronts.
It's quite a legacy. Helen Crawford's life, from defying landlords, challenging wartime profiteering, advocating for peace, confronting fascism, it just reveals this immense, often unsung power, the power of grassroots women's activism, and that idea of transnational solidarity, too. She really lived her beliefs, embodied change.
Absolutely. Her story, and the stories of figures like Mary Barber, Agnes Dolan, their activism spans social welfare, anti-war movements, foundational political shifts. It demonstrates how central these women were to shaping modern Scotland. Yet, like you say, their stories are only now really being fully unearthed. It really challenges us, doesn't it, to reconsider whose stories get told and how we understand our past, and maybe how social change actually happens.
Helen Crawford once declared, "If Christ could be militant, so could I." It makes you think, what does it mean for us today to recognize the militancy not just of protest, perhaps, but of that persistent, interconnected effort, fighting for a more just society, often from the margins, and how many other such militant figures in that sense are still out there awaiting their deep dive?